Welcome to Lead Your Life, the podcast for people who are seeking harmony in business and in life. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I'm an inner mastery and business mindset coach and the chief igniter here at the Lit Up Life. I feel an urgency to help people let go of past messaging so that they can make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what they value most. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity. It's a place, another land, another time.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I help entrepreneurs really create freedom for themselves. So once they receive that freedom, then they're able to make a lot of money doing what they love to do without sacrificing what's important to them. I find so many business owners that let the business run their lives versus them deciding what they want their life to look like and then making the business be a conduit to it. And life is too short not to lead a lit up life. So with that being said, this is a season for me. Like as you're listening to this in November, this like October, November, December timeframe is really a season. Like when I look at it for me and my own rhythm, because we're going to talk about the law of rhythm today, is my time to kind of catch up on sleep, really almost hibernate a little. I go to bed earlier. I actually get up earlier too, even though it's starting to get dark, because up here in North Idaho, it starts to get dark very early, and then it's not light until later in the morning. So our daylight gets much shorter. So for me, I love talking about this law of rhythm about this time of year, because there are different rhythms that we can work with or we can go against. And many of you have heard me talk about having the vase, meaning that we all are given this unending supply of energy, and we pour out into other people. And so then our energy gets depleted and we poke holes in our vase. So when we poke holes in our vase, that lets the energy seep out. And so by working with this law of rhythm, if we're going against a natural rhythm, then that helps poke or chink holes in our vase, and seeps out energy. So when we look at rhythm, I want to talk about, many of us try to manage our time. And what I would suggest is managing time and energy is really important as you go forward. Now, the question always is what kind of energy am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about numerous different types of energy. Usually the first idea of energy that comes to you is one that feels off balance. So, but this energy could be physical energy. So I mentioned, like, I like to hibernate during this time, and I've been traveling literally since October 8th. I was gone for 10 days in Italy, which was fantastic. I hosted a trip for Gonzaga University. I'll talk a little bit more about that and rhythms that I noticed in Europe, as well as how they integrate here. And then I've been traveling almost every weekend. I hosted my October retreat in Sandpoint, which was the best one that I've ever had. And the women there were just fantastic. And then did a quick trip to Kansas City to surprise my nephew, who was turning 13. And then heading to Sedona to hang out with the women I mastermind with for my own business. And then I've got like an immersive with my coach, some strategic planning for a board I'm on, and then it's Thanksgiving. So I'm ready for this consistent travel like this to not be as much. Travel is a part of what I love, and so I've built it in. And so it's become the new norm for me, which also means that if that's part of a new rhythm that I have, sometimes we have to set up structures to support that rhythm, and we may not have those structures in place or processes. That also goes for business, right? As we change the rhythm of our business, we might need to set up some different standard operating procedures. We might need to set up some different processes or policies as we go forward. So this law of rhythm basically says that everything in the universe is moving, right? And if you look at nature, nature has numerous rhythms. You think about the moon has a different cycle that it goes on. We have the tides that come and go. And each one of these have a different time period that this rhythm takes place. Then we've got seasons, right? And I know as you get closer to the equator, those seasons aren't necessarily seen or manifested the same way as they are in North Idaho, but there's a growth. So then there's a planting season, there's a growth season, there's a harvesting season, then there's this hibernation kind of season, so there's different rhythms that go along in nature. And if we look at those rhythms, it helps us understand the rhythms that show up in our lives. So energetically, it may be physical energy. And this happens also through a lifetime. Like I've found that going through menopause, my energy level, I have to manage differently than I did prior to that. When I was in my 20s, my energy level was much different than it is now in my 50s. Now, some of that people might go, oh, well, you're manifesting that. Some of it's just physically, right? Now, I also know when I talk about rhythm, I didn't realize this until I did a DNA test with Peter Crone and a organization he um, partnered with or collaborated with. And this DNA test told me that I had a propensity to be able to change time zones pretty easily, which I have found to be true for the most part, right? And I have a system that I use too that helps me with that. But ultimately, that is true. And that's a really positive thing because, like, when the time change happens here in the States, it doesn't really affect me. When I travel to other countries, I don't wake up in the middle of the night hungry. I don't like my body shifts pretty naturally. But what the downside of that is my rhythm, then I need to have a really tight bedtime routine, or my body doesn't know it's time to go to bed. So there are things that we can set up to help ourselves get into a rhythm. Now, I've also talked about rhythms. I don't know about you that are listening, but for me, I have a rhythm that really has become subconscious when I get up in the morning and like when I shower, I wash my body off, then I wash my face, then I wash my hair and put conditioner on it. If I'm out of sync with that, for some reason, if I do something different, right? Now there's other things I do, like shave my legs or whatever, TMI, but the point being is there's almost like a built-in routine now that just like when people get up, they typically brush their teeth. Now, not everybody does that, but like typically brush their teeth. So it's become a subconscious behavior that's in there. And when my rhythm gets popped out or I don't follow some type of flow with that, I do have to set up systems and be very conscious and very aware so that I don't knock myself out of kind of craziness. Now, talking about DNA also, there is epigenetics that talks about how we can change how our DNA actually presents itself with our mind. And so if you have a propensity to something or not, that's the physical biology. However, we can change how that shows up in the world. So when we talk about rhythm, what I also find with people is somebody will say, oh, I'm a night person, or I'm a morning person, or I'm a midday person. And that typically is usually their physical energy or when they feel the most focused on things. And just become aware that there are these cycles, right? That there is this rhythm that happens so that you can work with the rhythm and not against it. So with that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Let's talk about something every entrepreneur faces: selling. It's one of the biggest topics I hear from my community and clients. How can I sell without feeling the ick? I get it. And that's exactly why I created an ebook that guides you through the same script I use to grow my business year after year by leading sales conversations with heart and soul. If you want a selling approach that feels right, head over to thelituplife.com/ebook and grab your copy today. Now, let's get back to today's episode. Okay, we are back. So another thing with rhythm is that there's kind of three themes that I like to talk about with rhythm. One of them is this neutralization. So harmonize with what you want, right? So the law of vibration says like attracts like. So it's also about how do we then determine what it is that we want and then utilize nature's rhythm, but our own rhythm to then make that happen. When we deny that, there's this dichotomy of tension that happens or occurs. So if we continually choose to harmonize with what we want, and there's some very practical things, some of you might think this is kind of woo woo, but ultimately, like my coach recently had a word come to her for me around balance. As many of you know and have heard, I don't love the word balance. I think it's more harmony. But in this case, I have been looking for and wanting more balance in my life, talking about this travel, right? So I simply sit down and I go through all of the chakras. Some of them I call by name, some I call by color, and I'll simply say, for me, it's God, like God, open up my sacral chakra to be in tune with the vibration of balance. Allow that to come in and allow me to be in attunement to balance. And then I move to the next chakra and I simply say the same thing over and over again. And I do that numerous times during the day. And it is interesting how then it shows up a little differently. So that's one way you can take a look at this. Now, when we think about any kind of like negative phase of rhythm. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, I'm in this thing and it just feels like I consistently am having these things happen to me." Well, a piece of that is that what we focus on gets bigger. So when we're looking at this law of rhythm, it's important to look at too, what is it that I want and focus your energy there. Now, this neutralization also is really important to think about what is it that brings you energy and making sure you're taking time to do that. Like I try at least once a quarter to be out in nature, do some kind of hike and do a purposeful nature walk where I walk over a threshold and I'm in sacred space. That helps me with my energy, with my thinking. It helps fuel things. Now, sometimes we get depleted. And so our vase, those things that we do that usually give us energy are bringing us to neutral. And when we get to that point, we're kind of worn out and it feels like doing those things is work, when in fact it is bringing us energy. So just be aware. The other day, I've been literally working almost every weekend. Granted, I went to Kansas City and that was a fun trip. But the rest of them have all been where I've been hosting a trip, hosting a retreat, masterminding on my business. And so I took Monday off. I had a board meeting that I was supposed to attend, and I texted and just said, I'm not available. And it was okay, right? Like I needed some space to be able to recharge and be able to head into the next month of travel and working pretty much every weekend. So that neutralization is also about understanding what we need to stay in that neutral zone and add more energy to us. Now, the other piece of this too is thinking about flow. And when I think about flow, I think about a river and how, it moves and nothing really stays in one state forever, right? So that's kind of reassuring. And when you find your flow and finding your flow works with the universe instead of that rub of resistance. So when things feel kind of easy, sometimes what happens is we're not used to that. And so we'll create chaos to make up for it. Or someone I was talking to too was talking about this idea of busyness and action, where some of the inspired actions that they were wanting to take, they weren't taking because they were in this state of busyness, because that's what felt normal to them. So some of this is about backing up and looking at what feels normal to you and what is truly flow for you and what is truly the opposite end of that, like struggle, making sure we're not putting struggle in to something that is flowing easily, but being open to receiving that. So that's the second kind of theme, is flow. The third is gestation. And this idea of gestation is really about the fact that if you think about seeds, right? Like all seeds have a gestation and incubation period before they come to maturity. your goals, your ideas, they're all spiritual, right? They're in this non-physical world, and they're like non-physical seeds that, and many times they have an unknown gestation period. Sometimes the gestation period is pretty immediate and it happens. Others, it might take a month, it might take 3 years, right? And the universe continues to show us these things, or it moves on and gives it to someone else. But ultimately, we then have choice too. But it's a matter of thinking about, if we're manifesting, leaving open the possibility for it to happen very quickly, and being patient enough that if something needs to gestate, if we need to be in a presencing mode and be really present in order to open up to receive that, that sometimes it may be a little delayed, right? It may be a different time frame. And I've talked about the push and the pull, and when you pull too hard and it breaks like a guitar string, how that recoils. And so it's that art of getting into flow, feeling the pull, not necessarily pushing to get into a grind or into the hustle. So that gestation is really about letting things gestate in a period of time. Sometimes it's instantaneously, sometimes it's months or years, sometimes it's a day. And so the one caution I have about gestation is sometimes we hide behind gestation, and we may not be taking action, or we may not be doing things because we're saying it's gestating. Now, one of the things that honestly drives me absolutely bonkers is to hear some of my friends say, "Oh, I'm waiting on God." Well, if you have a desire, God's put it into your heart. So, we were given two ears to listen, but then also we have to take action, right? And it reminds me of the kind of story that I've told before on here about the drowning person, and how they had in mind that the Coast Guard was going to come and they were waiting for God to save them, right? And with this Coast Guard, because that's what their vision was, and they missed all of the other opportunities to not drown, right? And so that's where it's really important to keep an open mind about it, and be open to what's coming, but realize then too, we're required, in order to bring it into form, there usually has to be some inspired action along with it. Not always, but usually. So when we think about the law of rhythm, I would just offer up to you and invite you to notice your rhythms. Start out and look at one day. When do you feel your most alert? When do you feel physically the best? When do you feel the most social? Then blow that up into a week. Same questions. When do I feel the most creative? When am I feeling like I want to interact with people and be social? When is it that I feel like I want to go exert some physical energy? Same thing then with a month, right? Women run on a 28-day cycle. So there's sometimes some things that cycle with that physiological piece of it. Then looking at also a quarter or a year, right? Like, how does that cycle out? Now, you have to be careful. I talk about some real estate agent friends that I have and clients that will buy into that winter is going to be terrible because no one buys a home in the winter. But then I have other people in my life that are real estate agents that continue to sell homes and list homes. So being careful not to buy into a message that may or may not be true, but making sure that as we look at this gestation, as we look at this flow, as we look at this rhythm, that we're noticing what those patterns are. And some patterns internally and within ourselves, we may want to shift. And other patterns are patterns that we may want to start working with more versus working against. So that's the universal law of rhythm. Notice the different rhythms out in nature. Notice, and there are some rhythms that you may. So I have one client that's like, my best time is from 4 to 7, but she also has a family, and school is getting out and her family's getting home and they want dinner. And so that may not be the time she's able to utilize that focus in that way, right? Or she's choosing that, but because you could choose to change that up a little bit and have dinner at a different time or whatever. But there are choices that come along with it. And so she's picked her second best time to actually go in, and that's her creative time. So as you're managing your time, look at your energy and look at then that management of time. There are some practical things that I've seen. Some of this will work for some of you and some of it won't. I've seen where people have, this is a non-stress email. And so I check email twice a day. If you don't hear from me within 3 days, please reach out again. I've seen where people don't take calls. They put their calls on do not disturb during a certain period of time, or they put sleep on, which I don't know how people don't put that on. You know, you're in case of emergency, people will come through. So I know if something were to happen and Zach needed to get a hold of me, my son, that would happen. But there are things out there that you can set up systems to work the best for you in flow of this natural rhythm. So with that, I hope as we are entering into the winter months, you are able to see more of your rhythms and how those work. Everybody have a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you again soon. That's a wrap for this conversation. I'm so glad you've joined us. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you can catch all of our future episodes, and visit us at thelituplife.com for details on how you can become part of the Lit Up Life community. A quick shout out to my friend Jackie Wilson and her friends, the creators of our amazing theme music. Thanks so much for allowing us to share this perfect song with our listeners. Looking forward to having you listen in to our next episode.